Now for one of the first steps I'm going to do for removing the front suspension for the front end swap off the 2009 is I'm going to remove the shock from the shock mount. I don't know if you can see this yellow nut on top of this bolt. That is the top of the shock, and it is in the same location on the opposite side, a little bit more difficult to get to. There is the nut there. So I'll set the camera up where you can watch me take these off. With this truck being partially disassembled, it makes this process a lot easier to do. Okay, for the next set of bolts we're going to take out to remove the shock, we are back underneath the truck. Now this is behind the driver's side wheel hub assembly, to the right of the driver's side spring. So we're going to be removing this bolt right here, and it should be a 19mm bolt head, just like the top of the other bolts were. Now what makes this one fairly simple to take off is the fact that it has the nuts welded onto a flange that allows them not, or doesn't allow them to spin, so therefore makes it a pretty simple task. We'll try going up with it here. There we go. Really simple. The upper portion of the shock you can compress with just hand pressure, and you pull it out of its seat. Fairly simple to do. Just be sure to grab the other washer and rubber side of this. However, do not really recommend reusing used shocks. I, however, am going to reuse these for the initial install. Then after that, we will replace them with a nicer set of shocks. The next step for me in this teardown front end removal will be to remove the bolt on the Pitman arm, along with the bolt that holds in the steering column shaft, and then we will remove the fluid lines, return and feed. I don't know which direction is which, but we need to remove them both. And then we will need to remove the 3 bolts on the frame right here. These are the 3 bolts that secure the steering box onto the frame. These bolts are thicker than the ones on the 2003 model, which will require us to drill out the 2003 model frame with, stepper, drill bit, or whatever it takes to get them to the size they need to be. Now the 2003 frame is thicker in this area, so we will have to also get longer bolts. So I will start by removing the steering column bolt first. Okay, for the fluid lines, I think that it's a 19mm. I don't have a 19mm, so I'm going to attempt to use a 3/4 inch drive. And I think that should get it. Yeah. So 3/4 does it very well. These must have been off in the past to be as simple as they were to take off.
Don't believe that it matters which orientation you remove them in.
So the Pitman arm bolt is a 15/16 I don't know if this has a metric counterpart, but 15/16 fits it, and it's what I have. So here we go. Fairly simple to remove the nut itself. Like I said, I think some of the suspension parts have been off from this truck before, which is making this a little bit easier. Now, to release the actual ball joint from the Pitman arm, we're going to have to apply some form of blunt pressure, whether it be a hammer or take a spanner wrench to separate this here. So I'm going to try with a hammer first and see what happens. There it is. Now you simply just push up a little pressure and unthread the bushing, or the bushing, I guess is what you would call it. I like to attach the nut back to it. And then we have to come over to the opposite side and undo it from here to release the shock. And then we'll also need this mount, and we'll undo these to get the mount. But before that, we're going to undo the 3 bolts on the opposite side of the steering box. Okay, so we are currently in the front driver portion of the truck. These are the 3 bolts that are holding on the steering box. These bolts are 19 millimeter. Okay, so I stopped the footage to apply some penetrating oil to the opposite side of these bolts. You can reach that through the engine bay. Okay, so I've hit these with a breaker bar. Hopefully the air gun is strong enough to pull them out now. You know that you want to move back and forth between the bolts so that you don't get them too hot and cause them to break. You see the upper left one here was about to come out, but the others have are still a little tight. So this breaker bar, if I can keep it on the socket, it'll do the trick. Keep the socket on the nut itself. Okay, I've turned a few more times with the breaker bar, so let's try it again with the air gun. I think my biggest problem with my air gun is A, it's old, and B, my air tank is not fully charged yet, or full. There's one. There's 2. There is bolt number 3. Now the steering box should be ready to go. Now you can clearly see the Loctite on the bolts. To remove the Pitman arm shock bracket, we really need to go on the back side to remove the let's see, the 18 millimeter bolts. I don't know if you can tell, but the steel brace that goes across here is welded, has the nuts, or the bolts actually welded to it. So the nuts on the back side will spin freely and the bolts on the front side here will not. Okay, so we're on the back side of the Pitman arm bolts here. This is one of the nuts. Up there to the right is the second nut. To kind of give you an idea of where we're at, we're coming in next to the passenger side spring, behind the bump stop, and there are the 2 bolts. However, I can't seem to find a good place to hold the camera while I do this, so I'm gonna go ahead and do this with the camera off. It wasn't real hard to get to. You could fit in there with the air ratchet, and as you see, well, if the thing would focus here, as you see, the bracket just kind of came off by itself under its own pressure. No big deal. Everything's still attached, and we'll just screw the nuts back on the back side of these bolts. Okay, for the next step for me will be to undo the front sway bar in-link bolts. They are a 19 or a 3/4 inch bolt that's on this truck. However, they don't look stock to me, but whatever the size might be, they still come off the same. So I'm going to set the camera up where you can see me take these bolts off, and here we go. 19mm on the bolt itself, and 3/4 on the back side, or 19mm, whatever you have available. There's that. Take the hammer, hit the bolt through as well as you can. You're going to take and put the air ratchet back on the bolt, and I'm using a 15mm wrench and pulling towards me, and using the air socket to reverse thread it, and it comes right out. So now I'm going to remove the bolt that's holding the front sway bar onto the frame of the truck. It has one bolt, it should have two. Here we go. Now to remove the two bolts from the frame mount sway bar on the driver's side of the vehicle. Now all we have to do is just pull the sway bar out. Now on to the Panhard bar. I don't know exactly what size this nut and bolt are, so I'm using a pipe wrench. Not exactly advised way to do this, but I think it's going to work. Now to try and pull the Panhard out. Fairly simple. So from this point on, we've pretty much got all of the front axle set disconnected from the vehicle. So what we'll have to do now is attach some sort of jack to the frame, and then jack up the frame itself, leaving the axle set on the trailer. I have not undone the rear 4-link bolts yet, because it'll help stabilize the frame from tipping over left or right and causing the springs to shoot out uncontrollably. Stay tuned. Okay, with the jack in place, we're going to jack up the frame, leaving the axle set on the ground. We're going to try and remove the spring set. Now with the jack stands in place, we'll lower the frame down onto the stands. Now for the passenger side. Okay, now for the 4-link bars. I don't know if you can see in the shot or not, but I have placed a 4x4 underneath the 4-link because my hand is going to be underneath it, and if the 4-link does fall, I would like it not to smash my hand. So here we go. I'm working with a 15/16. Okay, to get the bolt to back itself out, I'm using a screwdriver to apply pressure between the bolt's head and the frame of the truck. Now for the opposite side. We're going to pretty much repeat the same process. Okay, for the next step of the front axle removal, we'll have to remove the front brake lines. Already got a little bit of pressure on these lines. Probably should have done this a step or two before. Okay, to help slow down some of the brake line leak off, just so it doesn't make as large of a mess, I've used some vacuum stops and just capped off the end of the line. So now we will remove the brake line bracket. It's a 13mm bolt. Okay, the next step, remove the ABS brake sensor. Just depress the prong here and pull. Simple enough. And repeat the same process on the other side. Now to get the axle set out, you'll want to pull the axle set forward and then pull it out the driver's side of the vehicle. If you're trying to go out the passenger side, the pumpkin of the axle set will hit the frame. It just makes the job a lot harder. So you just pull forward and out the driver's side.